Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Investing with IBD podcast sponsored by Vantage Point. It's Wednesday, September 8th, 2021, and on today's show, we've got a very special guest. So first, let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Justin Nielsen, your host. I'm joined by Arusha Paris, O'Neill Global Advisors Portfolio Manager, the co-manager of my fantasy football team, the Gilligan to my skipper. Welcome back, Arusha. Thanks for being on.
Great to be here, Justin.
Yep, we did our draft yesterday, so that's why he's smiling. It was successful.
Right.
We're good to go. We're locked and loaded. Did you recover?
Shockingly.
It was a rough start. It was a
very rough start. Yes.
Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring on our real main attraction here. We've got returning to the show, Kenny Polcari. He is a managing partner at Kace Capital Advisors. He was a floor trader on the New York Stock Exchange for 4 decades. That's a lot of experience. He was actually the floor trader for William O'Neill for a number of years. I can't tell you how great it was for me personally to get, a tour of the New York Stock Exchange from Kenny himself. Just an absolute treat. So, Kenny, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Justin, for having me. Narush, thanks for having me, because it's a pleasure always to come back. I enjoy our time together. I enjoy the conversation. So I suspect we're going to have the same today.
Yeah, I will say that one thing that being on the floor with you, I guess it's just your Italian nature. You seem to use your hands as punctuation, and
all the time.
What all the traders learned, anyone that was on a tour with you, is back up a little bit, because you hit people in the chest a lot as punctuation.
It was only for emphasis, right?
For emphasis, yes. And I still have some of the bruises
not hitting the women, only the men.
Some of the bruises to prove it that when you get animated. So a lot of fun. So on today's show, we're going to get Kenny's take on the markets. We're going to get some stock ideas from him, especially though. We're going to focus on those broad strokes of what he's seeing out there. And then, we've got 9/11 coming up this weekend. So that happened 20 years ago. Kenny's going to share some of the experiences that he had being there in New York, being a floor trader on the New York Stock Exchange. And so really looking forward to hearing about those experiences. It's really a touching thing that Kenny shares. So first, let's go ahead and maybe we start with the market. Kenny, what index do you like to look at most?
So I think the one that you have to look at from my position is the S&P, right? Because it's the broader index for kind of the large, mid-cap, large-cap names. And then you got to look at the IWM or the RTY, gives you kind of the Russell, the overview of the Russell. So the Dow is great to look at. Listen, the Dow is the Dow, right? But it really is only 30 stocks, and it was relevant back in 1912. And as much as it's around today and everyone, likes to look at it, the Dow is not representative, I don't think, of the broader economy. So you have to kind of move with the times, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've been making new highs in the last couple of weeks here. It's been quite a run since we had that coronavirus crash in 2020. Not too much of a break here. And I mean, if we go back even further, I mean, this has been quite a run for a number of years now. I mean, really, a lot of people are pointing to 2016 or even 2009, the financial crisis that we had in 2008 and the recovery afterwards. So what is your take on where we're at, big picture, for the market right now?
So listen, I'm a big believer in the markets. I'm a believer in the markets creating wealth. I'm a believer in, how they structured and what they're meant to do. So I'm not surprised that we see over the long term, the market continue to advance. And I would suspect that's going to happen as we go along. It's hard not to say, though, that the surge that we've seen since, really, I guess since the crisis, 2009, has been fueled by central bank activity, and not just the Fed. I'm talking about the Bank of England, the ECB, the European Central Bank, the People's Bank of China, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Bank of Japan. All these central banks got together, as you know, during the crisis. And during the crisis, I don't mean the COVID crisis. I mean the great financial crisis of 2008 and 9. And I think what a lot of people outside of the industry don't really realize is how close the global financial system came to really the edge, right? I mean, it was a very tenuous time. And for those of us who were in the business, and listen, I had the vantage point of looking at it directly from the New York Stock Exchange, through the eyes of institutional investors. And my clients were institutional investors in this country as well as in Europe, right? So hedge funds, mutual funds, pension plans, those kinds of institutions. During that crisis, during that year and a half that we saw the market lose, 60% of its value and get crushed. But really, I think what's important is how close we came in terms of financial Armageddon, right? The complete collapse. And so it was clear that the central banks had to do something, and thank God that they did. And so I think it's hard not to pinpoint a lot of the action from since then to the support that those central banks not only started to give in 2009, but continue to give today, nearly more than a decade later. And so we could talk about that because that's clearly fueled, fan the flames here.
Well, again, and that accelerated. It seemed like they were trying to back off a little bit, and then of course COVID hit. And then it really accelerated. They didn't want to take any chances with what was going on last year.
No, and I understand the COVID situation, just added complexity to this to the conversation. Yet, remember when Ben Bernanke, before even Janet Yellen, remember when Ben Bernanke was towards the end of his career, and they were already starting then to talk about, as Yellen was taking over, that we should try to start to normalize, right? We should try to pull back. And remember how anxious the markets got. And I think part of that is just a result of the nervousness. I hear you. And then the Fed thought they had pumped all this money in and they'd stabilized the system. The last thing they wanted to see was a complete meltdown. And so they didn't do anything, which, I understand. You can argue it both ways. On the other side, I think in retrospect, it might have been actually a mistake. Now, look, they could have pulled back. And then when COVID hit, they could have just jumped in again, right? But in fact, they never pulled back. And when COVID hit, they just went more. Right? And so I hear you. But now we're in this place where we all recognize it. They've got to start to pull back they got to start somewhere. And if they don't start pretty damn soon, in my mind, it's only going to be worse because they keep pushing the cookie jar and pushing the cookie jar and pushing it. It's like, listen, taking your phone away. I'm writing my note for tomorrow and I'm using this analogy. When a parent has to take the phone away from the teenage kid who throws a temper tantrum and then he gets over it or she gets over it, right? The longer we keep pushing this, the temper tantrum is going to be that much worse. And that's really kind of what I'm afraid of, right?
I mean, I kind of look at the fourth quarter of 2018 as that little bit of a temper tantrum. And it was just at the thought of, we're just kind of saying that we're going to do this.
Exactly right. And now not only, now they've been talking about it much more. You saw Jay Powell come out at Jackson Hole, and it was actually the weeks leading up to Jackson Hole. Notice what they did, and they do this a lot, where they send out different talking heads from the Fed to kind of appear on this station, appear on that station, do this interview, hint at, well, maybe we're going to start, because they want to test the reaction. They want to take the temperature of investors to see, okay, can we do this? What was the reaction? What if we start to say we're talking about it? And that's what we saw leading into Jackson Hole, which I thought was legitimate. That was fine because Jay Powell is on a certain level trying to control the narrative. And he should, right? Because he sits in this position where everyone's going to point the finger at him anyway. Right. So he should try to control the narrative. And then when he came out.
So Kenny, just getting back to the current market, for the short to intermediate term, where do you think we're at? Do you think we're due for some kind of pullback here?
Yeah, I think we're toppy, and I think we are due for a pullback, right? Yep. And what I want to see happen is every time we start to get a pullback, everyone from the Fed comes out and reassures everybody, and then all the buy the dippers go in and boom, it's off to the races again. Right?
Exactly.
What I'm really kind of hoping is that the Fed is not so quick, that the Fed is going to let it kind of be a little bit of turmoil. I think a little bit of turmoil is okay. I think shaking the branches to see who falls out is okay, right? Look, we haven't had a 10% correction since when? Since COVID, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been going on for 18 months now, and every time we're off 3%, someone comes out and says, don't worry, and all the buy the dippers come in and boom, we're higher again. And so I think the Fed, and I would love to see the Fed just say, look, we're stepping back. We're not pulling away, but we're not going to be so aggressive to keep, wiping everybody's. I can't say that, right? they have to let the turmoil happen a little bit, right? It has to. It has to. It's not healthy for it not to.
And be very clear and firm, this is happening.
So I think it's happening. And I think it's happening. I think the market is going to back off. I would like, personally, I'd like to see like a 7 to 10% correction, which I think is realistic. I think Morgan Stanley and Wells Fargo, they've come out calling for anywhere from a 10 to 15% correction because they think it's a little bit more toppy. And I think it's very possible. You and I both know that. We know how quick the psyche can change. And with the automation today, we also know how quick you can, fall 3, 4, 5% in a day.
Right.
We've seen it. So it's not like it can't happen. But I think the more they push it, the more juice they keep giving it, then when the fall does come, then I think it's going to be one of those crazy falls where suddenly you're going to see the market down, 10% or 7%, and then you're going to get the circuit breakers that get elected, right? Yeah. But I think you're going to see that happen. And quite honestly, and I hate to say it like this, but I think it has to happen because it's got people in. This is not reality. Do you realize we have a whole generation of people in the financial services industry now that came into this during the crisis when rates went to zero and there's nothing but stimulus, and they have no experience with a down market or normalization of rates. And I'm not saying shame on them. It's shame on us for letting that happen because what are they going to do when it hits the fan?
Right. They don't know the term correction.
Exactly right. And they don't
3%. That's a correction.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're all arguing about, oh my God, mortgage rates went from 2 3/4 to 3%. Oh my God, I can't afford the house. You can't afford the house. My first mortgage was 15.5% in 1983. And so for people to say, oh, it's never going to happen. You're a dinosaur. It's never going to happen. A dinosaur? Ooh, you know what I mean? It is going to happen. Trust me. And that's what I'm afraid of, because I'm afraid that they're going to lose sight of inflation, and then inflation is going to rear its ugly head, and then suddenly the Fed's going to have to say, and so we're not talking about quarter of 1% moves anymore. Now you're talking about half and full percentage point moves, and then they're all going to go, oh my God. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, we're going to give Kenny a little bit of a chance to cool down after that last segment. But when we come back, we're going to get into some of those broad strokes. So make sure you stay tuned for that.
Kicking yourself for that early exit? You can prevent them, and it's easier than you think. Go to freestockcoaching.com to see the tool independent traders are using to perfect their trades. Artificial intelligence. AI doesn't involve staring at your screen for hours, and no research is needed. Just pick a stock and press a button. Visit freestockcoaching.com to see a live demo now. You need to be ready for rapid market changes, and AI can help you avoid potential losses. Check out freestockcoaching.com to learn more. Trading involves financial risk and is not suitable for all investors. Past results do not guarantee future performance.
Welcome back to the Investing with IBD podcast, sponsored by Vantage Point. It's Justin Nielsen here, along with Arusha Paris of O'Neill Global Advisors and our special guest, Kenny Polcari. You can reach Kenny Polcari, by the way, at Twitter at his handle, at Kenny Polcari. He is the managing partner at Kace Capital Advisors. So Kenny, with all your experience in the markets, again, really being in the thick of things, you were saying how we just haven't had that correction in a while. So how are you positioning yourself right now? What is it that you're looking at as your, I guess, indicators? And what is it that you're looking to get into to kind of protect yourself from a potential real correction of 7 to 10%, or I guess kind of a correction?
So I got a couple of things. And as if you want to play the protection game on the downside because you're worried, which I am, so I bought the VIXY, right? VIXY, which when you buy it, you actually go short the S&P, right? So it's like you buy it, so it goes up in value. The market's actually going down, right? But that helps to protect as on the retail side, as a retail investor. That's the tool that I use, right? The VIXY, VIXY, because you're betting on the volatility, because you know how volatility spikes.
And that's all based on the options market, the implied volatility of the S&P 500, and
right. So and this is not a long-term, like people don't buy this to hold this for long-term, like you might buy Apple. It's very tactical, and it's very time specific in terms of, I bought it last week because I suspect, and I suspect I'm going to hold it probably through the end of the month, because I think we're going to run into this volatility during this month, right? We started to see a little bit yesterday. We started to see it again today. So that actually was it was up small today. I think it was up 8% yesterday, but let's see how it closed out today. I think it was the market was under pressure, and this thing was up another. Actually, it was flat today.
Yeah,
it didn't do anything, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the S&P 500. I mean, for as much as growth got hit today, S&P 500 really only came down. Like
only came in 5 points. Yeah, 6 points. Yeah, so it came in small. But I suspect as the S&P comes under more pressure, then you're going to see you'll see that. But I also like going into the end of the year and actually even into the new year. I'm not one of these people that does this massive portfolio shift because things that are in my portfolio are names that I like in the long term. Am I selling my Apple position? Hell no. Am I buying more though at the top? No, I'm not. But if Apple comes in 25 or 30% on some correction where we see a lot of money go into the big name stocks where it's easy to raise cash and they dislocate Apple because of that reason, would I buy more down 25 or 30? Hell yes, I will.
Right.
But I'm not buying it at the top. But that doesn't mean I'm not buying names like IBM, right? Because I look at IBM as a value play. It's a big blue chip Americana name, right? It's a good dividend payer. I'm not worried about IBM going out of business. I think it's safety. So going in for me, that provides some safety. Other names that I'll get into or that I'm getting into or adding to are financial names. I have utility now, right? But I play the utilities with the XLU because it's just easier, right? The XLU ETF, utility ETF.
Spiders, right?
That's actually been good for me because I bought the XLUs back in the summer, right, in June. So where you see it down there about $62, and so it's done well for me, right? And I think it will.
And you've gotten a dividend out of it too, I'm sure.
And I've gotten a dividend out of it, and so I play that game where I just reinvest. I'm not taking my dividends as cash. They just automatically reinvest in the individual stocks that I hold, right?
Kenny, for XLU, were you when you bought it around 62? Were you using as it was coming into the 200-day moving average, anything like that to buy it, or was it just more a larger picture?
Well, it was two things. I always look at it. When I come up with a name that I like, I do look at it on the chart. And the fact that it was coming in and testing the 200 made a lot of sense to me, right? I was betting on the fact that it wasn't going to break, and in fact, it didn't. And it's gone higher from here, right? I look at my IBM. IBM, it would not be the same, right? IBM is below its trend line. But what I like about IBM is when we talk about the infrastructure play and the money they're going to spend and where IBM stands in that, and because it is big blue chip Americana, it does have a nice dividend. So therefore, I don't think IBM is going to collapse. And if it does, guess what? I like it. So I would end up buying more IBM just because I like it.
And then, as you said, you've got that VIXY position that's really kind of allowing you to take the sting out of some of these holdings that you have. Because again, if they get thrashed, VIXY is going to be going up, taking some of the sting out. Right, exactly, and it can go up a lot very quickly when that volatility goes up.
How the VIX can spike suddenly, right? You
get
hit with something out of left field that maybe you didn't expect. Like, which is
you want to see a VIX spike? Go look at 2008, right?
Right, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
So now, are you looking at the 10-year Treasury? I mean, you mentioned how you're into financials. You're doing some of these dividend plays. Are you tying that to the 10-year Treasury yield at all?
I look at the 10-year Treasury and then what happens to the dollar, right? Because as Treasury, as the yield goes up, and Treasury is that adds strength to the dollar, and then you see what happens to the commodity complex, right? Because commodities are priced in dollars. So as the dollar gets stronger, then commodities tend to come under a little bit of pressure as a result. But yes, I'll keep my eyes on, and I actually think the year is going to end with the 10-year Treasury closer to 1. I was closer to 2 earlier in the year, but I think if we end up at about between 1.6 and 1.7, I think that's probably a fair estimate. Where I think the 10-year Treasury is going to end by December.
Now, Kenny, one thing that you like, so you're still invested in technology stocks, but you like to, for innovation and things like that, you like to go to a specific ETF. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. So I like Kathy Woods' ARK ETF because it's a tech disruptor, right? So everything that's in there represents kind of, the 21st century, right? IBM is not in her ARK ETF, but Coinbase is, Spotify is, Shopify is, Tesla is, right? Those are all disruptive names in the industries that they're in. And I don't want to necessarily, because there are so many tech disruptors, I don't necessarily want to make a bet. I'm not going to buy a little piece of everything. I'd say I like Kathy Woods. I like her style. I like her analysis. I like her presentation. So let her do the work. And I'm going to ride her coattails. And I did that with ARK, ARKK. right? And I like that. I like that position. That position for me, it's probably a little bit overweight right now. That's about 11% of my portfolio, which is probably too much. But I can fix that now with new money that I'm going to put in. I'm not going to buy more ARK at the moment. I'll buy some of the other names that we discussed, and that will help balance that out a little bit. But I'm not selling my tech names. I'm not selling my disruptor names at all, because I think, as we go forward, it's all about the disruption. And I think she's right on point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we come back, we're going to get into a little bit more of a somber note, and Kenny is going to share with us his experience from 20 years ago as we look at the anniversary of 9/11 and what that was like being at the New York Stock Exchange, working there, and everything that entailed. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back.
Why trade off hope and optimism when you can trade using the world's most powerful indicator? Artificial intelligence has been used by traders to navigate the markets for the past 3 decades. Visit freestockcoaching.com to see the world-leading AI forecasting software for yourself. Trusted by more than 32,000 traders, AI uses millions of data points to track market trends, giving you the support you need right now. Go to freestockcoaching.com and we will help you find great opportunities today. Our experts will show you what stocks are setting up for big changes right now. So head over to freestockcoaching.com for a free demo. Trading involves financial risk and is not suitable for all investors. Past results do not guarantee future performance.
Welcome back to Investing with IBD, sponsored by Vantage Point. I'm your host, Justin Nielsen, along with Arusha Paris from O'Neill Global Advisors and Kenny Polcari from Kace Capital Advisors. Now, Kenny spent 40 years on the New York Stock Exchange as a floor trader. As a young upstart, he's seen a lot of things, but nothing probably compares to what you saw 20 years ago during 9/11. During that whole time, a lot of things were changing for the exchange. We've just, again, we're looking at 20 years now coming up this weekend. We've just pulled out of Afghanistan. A lot of things have happened in that 20 years. So Kenny, can you take us back a little bit and just kind of share with us what that was like for you personally 20 years ago and for the exchange?
Yeah. It's interesting because there's been a ton of mixed emotions as we've approached this 20th anniversary, and I think a lot of it ignited by what you said, kind of the events of the recent past with U.S. and Afghanistan and what's happened there now, and it's kind of stirred up a lot of emotion for a lot of people. But for any of the listeners that were either too young to remember or weren't in New York or DC or Shanksville, Pennsylvania. My experience, I had an office on the 55th floor of Tower 2, right? And I would walk into my office every morning and I'd look out the window, and the window would look right out over the Hudson River and over Jersey. And I used to, here I was this kid from Boston, and now I ended up in New York, and I was a member of the New York Stock Exchange, and I had a fairly vibrant business, and I had this office on the 55th floor of the World Trade Center. Like it was almost like a fairy tale for me, right? I used to walk in my house every day, clicking my heels, singing "If My Friends Could See Me Now," because like that when you're 17 years old and you're trying to write the story of what your future is going to look like, that's not the story I would have written necessarily, but nonetheless, here I was, right? And so I had my own business at the time, and I used to go to the office in the morning, and then I'd leave there every day, like at around 5 minutes to 9, to go across the street 3 blocks over the New York Stock Exchange to work during the day, because during the day I was on the floor. So in the morning or at night, I'd be in my office, right, where I had all my papers and all that stuff, right? And so I went to work that day. And I think what people need to understand also, if you had you never been, the trade centers, because they were so big, the elevators didn't go from the lobby all the way up to 110. The elevators went from the lobby to 46. And if you worked above the 46th floor, you'd have to walk around to a different bank of elevators that would take you from 46 up to 110. And so I was on the 55th floor. So I'd have to go to 46, walk around, go up to 55, and then go to my office. And if you were the only person in the elevator, I used to get to the office every morning at 5 minutes to 7. So as I got to the trade center, I'd press the button in the lobby. I'd wait for the elevator. You'd get in. You'd press 46. The elevator would go up to 46. You'd get out. You'd walk around. You'd press the button for the next elevator. You'd wait for it to come. Then when it came, you'd go up to 55. If you were the only person in the elevator, it could take you 8 or 10 minutes to get in or out of the building just by the time you waited for the elevators. You went in and out. If there were 2 or 3 people in the elevator with you, it could take you 15 or 20 minutes if somebody pressed the button here, the elevator stopped, the door's open, you gotta wait, the door's closed. And so that's key to this part of the story, because when I tell you what happened, you'll understand. But that morning I was there in my office. I was, the 5 guys that there were 6 of us, and I had my office in that position. I had the window of my office looked out over the river. And the other 4 guys had an office. It was an interior office across hall from mine. It was interior. There were no windows in the office. And so these guys would come to work, and they were doing, all the work that they would typically do every morning. And I was in my office doing my stuff. Now remember, it was August had just ended. It was September 11th. It was my business. I had to go through bills. I had to approve bills. I had to pay bills. And so I had a stack of papers on my desk. And these guys, they came into my office about 5 minutes of 8. And they said, we're going to go to the exchange and have breakfast. You could go to the New York Stock Exchange up on the 7th floor. There was this thing called the Members Luncheon Club. And they served beautiful breakfast and lunch there every day. And you could go bring clients, you could bring guests. And so we used to go once or twice a week as a firm. And we'd go up and we'd talk about a situation. We'd talk about, they'd ask me questions about what happened in the crowd here. We'd talk about different clients, what they needed, what they didn't need, what was important to them, not important, all that kind of stuff, right? And this morning they came in and they said, we'll come with us. We're going to go to the exchange. And I said, I can't go. I said, I got too much work to do. I go, you guys go. I'll just meet you over at the exchange, at 9 o'clock. Just leave. So, go enjoy yourselves, whatever. So they left at 8 o'clock and they left. I was alone up in this office on the 55th floor. And they go down the elevator to 46. They go down to the lobby. They get outside. It was a spectacular day. And they start walking across the street. And for some reason, one of them looked at the other 3 and said, I'm going to get Kenny. I want Kenny to come to breakfast. So he said to the other 3, you guys go across the street, go get the table. I'm going back up to get Kenny. Now, he could have easily called me on the cell phone to say, Kenny, just come to breakfast. But he knew that I would have said, I can't, click, and would have hung up. So this young man came back in the building, came back on the elevators, came back upstairs to the 55th floor. Now he sticks his head in my office. It's now 8:20 because they left at 8. They get downstairs at 8:10. He comes back upstairs. Now it's 8:20. And he sticks his head in my office and he said to me, I looked at him and I go, Jonathan, what are you doing? I thought you guys went to breakfast. He said, Kenny, we did. He goes, but you don't understand. We want you to come to breakfast. Now, there was a trade that had happened the day before. It was this big trade that we did, and they wanted to talk about this trade, what I did, what was going on. I said, listen, I can't go. I already told you I got too much work to do. Look at all this paper, the bills I had on my desk. I can't go. But this kid had a bug up his backside that he would not take no for an answer. And he kept saying to me, come on, come on. And then he finally said, look, we'll come back at the end of the day. We'll help you do whatever you need to do. Whatever bills you need to pay, whatever you need to do, we'll help you do everything. Now, look. I'm 6 feet, 235 pounds. I'm always hungry. It's not like I'm not hungry. I was hungry, but I also had work to do. But he was insistent that I leave and go to breakfast. And so I flipped around on my chair and I looked out the window, and it was, when I tell you, a perfect day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. And it was one of those September mornings on the East Coast that was just joyous. I mean, the weather was just perfect, and the temperature was perfect, and it was perfect. And so he convinced me, and so I picked up my jacket and we left. It was about 8:22 when we left the office. Got in the elevator, went downstairs again, and we got out to the lobby. Now it's 8:30, 8:32, and we start walking across the 3.5 blocks to go to the exchange. And we get to the exchange, we're up to the 7th floor to have breakfast. Now, remember what I just said. I'm on the 7th floor of the exchange, which is 3.5 blocks east of the trade centers. Trade centers are over here, 2 buildings side by side. The first plane comes north to south, and hits the north tower way up highs at the top of the building between 80 and 100, right? It took out about 20 floors when it hit the building. But because it was going north to south, the explosion was going south, right? As it exploded through the building, the explosion and the flame shot out to the south. The exchange is to the east. And that was way up in the hundreds, and we were way down on the 7th floor. I didn't hear it. I didn't feel it. I didn't see it. I had no clue what had just happened. Nor did anybody, right? And so now we have breakfast, we get downstairs, and you know when you go someplace and something has happened and there's all this commotion and people are running around, but yet nobody really knows what happened. And so when I got in the elevator, there was all this commotion, and I thought to myself, what the hell's going on? And I said to the security guard, I go, what's this commotion? He said to me, a plane flew inside of the Trade Center. And you almost wanted to laugh because you're thinking to yourself, a plane flew into the Trade Center? Like, it's not like you can't see them. They're the biggest thing in downtown Manhattan. It was spectacular. And then your first thought was, it was like a commuter plane. The guy had a heart attack. He flew into the building. Listen, it happened in 1946 at the Empire State Building. The guy went right into the 86th floor. But it was a single-engine Cessna, right?
Right.
It was dangling from the 86th floor, right? He goes, no. He goes, it wasn't. He goes, it was a jet. And I looked at him and I go, it can't be a jet. Jets don't fly down the west side of Manhattan. I mean, it's just not part of the flight path. And why would a jet fly through the Trade Center? Like I looked at him like he was completely lost his mind.
Yeah.
And he said to me, go outside and look. And so from the front door of the New York Stock Exchange, you could not actually see the buildings because of the other buildings were in the way. But when you looked up in the sky, you could see crap just flying in the air, paper and smoke and just shit like flying in the air. And I thought to myself, I've been going to call my wife to find out what's going on. Unbeknownst to me, friends of mine who had been at work in other parts of the city, who had TVs in their offices, who saw this whole thing unfolding, who knew I had an office in the Trade Center, had called her when the first plane hit. And so she was already watching TV, but she had already tried to call my office, and now there was no answer because I wasn't there, right? And then she called down to the floor, and the guy next to us who picked up the phone said to her, I haven't seen Kenny. Right now it's 9 o'clock, basically. It's 8:58. He goes, I haven't seen Kenny. So now she's, rightly so, she's panicking because now she can't remember which building I'm in, which floor I'm on, nothing. And she's just watching TV like everybody else. So when I go onto the floor, I pick up the phone to call my wife. And when she picks up the phone, she's crying. And now I still, because I haven't seen it, and I can't really wrap my head around what I was just told, I'm not really appreciating what's happening, right? So she's crying. And I said, Evelyn, why are you crying? Turn on the TV. You have to tell me what's happening. And she starts screaming at me, where are you? Where are you? Well, at that moment, I laughed. I go, I'm at work. Where are you? Because what was I going to say? What are you trying to catch me in a lie? What do you think I am? But unbeknownst to me, all this was happening, right? And she was screaming, crying, where are you? Where are you? So that's what I said. And then suddenly, she starts screeching into the phone because now she's watching on TV as the second plane is circling. Now, here's what I have to tell you. Now, I'm on the phone. I'm on the floor of the exchange. You can't really see out. If you've ever been on the floor, you understand what I mean, right? There are no windows there. I mean, there are windows, but they're much higher. The floor was low. The windows are high, right? She starts screeching, and I'm saying to Evelyn, why are you screaming? And then suddenly, the plane hits the building. Now, here's what you have to understand. The second plane came from the west east. Yeah. And because it hit the second building in the middle, guess where it hit the second building? The 55th floor.
Oh my God.
It hit it at an angle, and with the wingspan, it took out 20 floors. But when the plane hit the building, because it was going west to east, when the explosion came out of the other side of the building, it came east. The exchange is east, and because it was lower in the building, the force of the explosion and the force of the thrust of the explosion was eastward, right? So it went towards the exchange. Now I'm on the phone with her, and she's screaming, and I don't understand. And then suddenly there was this massive explosion when the plane hit, right? And not only did you hear this explosion, and I can't even tell you because I don't live in a war-torn country where you hear what bombs sound like. I've never heard a bomb drop, but this was a bomb. I mean, the sound of the explosion was so loud and so intense. But besides that, the force of the explosion caused that you could feel the building shake and the windows, right? You could, and now I'm saying, now my language turns very colorful because now I'm trying to understand what is happening. And she's trying to say Al-Qaeda and planes and Al-Qaeda. Who the hell is Al-Qaeda? I don't like, these are all words. I had no idea what she was talking about. And she's screaming and crying into the phone. Now she still thinks I'm actually in the building, right? She doesn't realize that I'm actually on the floor because she's not listening to me, right? She's just screaming. And so then they sounded the alarm at the exchange. It was, you know, the building had hit, I think at 9:01, I think it was probably 9:04. They suddenly sounded the alarm at the exchange because they wanted everyone to get out, because now it was clear that this was not just a one-off, that this was something much more dire, right? And when you think of America and you think of capitalism, everyone thinks of the New York Stock Exchange. It really is. It represents. It is part of the fabric of the nation, right? And so they sounded the alarm at the exchange because it became, somebody made the decision, you got to get out of the building. You got to get, because no one knew what was coming next, right? So I said to her at the moment when the alarm went off, you know, I said to her, I have two daughters, and at the time one was in 9th grade, one was in 6th grade, and I said to my wife, I need you to kiss the girls, and you need to tell them that Daddy loves them very much, because I didn't know what I was going to see when I walked outside. And I didn't know if I was going to make it home that day or not. So we walked out the east side of the building. You couldn't go out the west side of the building because the trade center was on the west side. So they made everyone go out the east side. So we got out to the east side, and I was on the corner of Broad and Wall. And they were urging us to walk east, away from the exchange, down Wall Street. And we started to do that. And then suddenly somebody thought, they started blowing whistles, and they wanted everyone to come back inside the building because they thought people were safer inside than out. And I looked around and I go, I am not going in a building. No way. I'm outside in the street. If I'm going to die today, I'm going to see it coming. I don't want to be in some building. And then I couldn't even imagine, right? So I did not go back inside the New York Stock Exchange. I continued to walk east down Wall Street towards the East River. And when you get about halfway down Wall Street, you can turn around and you can see just the top halves of the trade center. You couldn't see the whole thing, but you could see the top. And it was at that moment that I saw what everyone else had been seeing, right? I saw both buildings in flames, the smoke, and I could see, without identifying that it was you, Arush, or it was you, Justin, or it was Chris, but you could see the images of bodies falling, right? You could just see them. And I kept standing there in the street, and I kept rubbing my eyes, and I kept looking, because I wasn't processing what I was saying. I was going, it was almost like it was a movie, right? Like I couldn't process it, yet it was happening. And so we turned around, we continued to walk. And you know what was really interesting too is you could hear the sirens, and you could hear the fire engines, and you could hear the alarms, but it was like the world was quiet. Like you could almost hear a pin drop as well. You know what I mean? No, people weren't screaming and freaking out. All people were just walking like drones, but nobody was talking. And remember, you couldn't use your cell phone because the tower one had the big cell tower on it, got knocked out when the building got knocked out. So my cell phone was useless. Even though you tried, it wasn't connecting anywhere, right? Because it was just, the system was all completely. So as much as I tried to call my wife or my parents or whoever, it just wasn't connecting. So there was still cell phone, there was still pay phones on the corners in 2001. And there were people lined up to use the payphone. I go, I ain't fucking waiting to use a payphone. I'm out of here, right?
Right.
So we walked down the East River, and then we started walking north, because I lived north of the city. I lived about 50 miles north of New York City, and the subways came to a halt. Not that I was even going downstairs into a subway, because I wasn't. The bridges and tunnels all came to a halt, and so the traffic was stuck. And so all the yellow cabs, any car that was on the street, because it was such a gorgeous day, everyone had their windows down, right? It wasn't like midsummer, it was 100 degrees out, but it was like 70-degree day. But it was a beautiful day, right? But everyone had their windows down. And so as you're walking on the street, you could hear the radio announcer from car to car to car. You could just hear it repeat and repeat, and you could hear the sirens, and And but then you could also hear a pin drop. It was like that surreal, right? And so we walked all the way we got to Chinatown, which is at the Manhattan Bridge, right? Because downtown by the financial district is the Brooklyn Bridge, and then the next one is the Manhattan Bridge, which is right at Canal Street in Chinatown. And so we got to just about there, and we left out the exchange at 9:04. Now it's just about 10 o'clock. Now remember, the building collapsed at 10:01, right? And so suddenly you heard what sounded like they were blowing up the streets, like this rumbling. And you remember like Independence Day where they just blew up the city and the streets were blowing up? And I thought to myself, they're blowing up the subways. Like I fully expected to see the streets start to explode, right? And then it sounded like it was coming from above, like there were planes above, right? So you're looking up and you're looking down, and I fully expected at any moment to get blown up. But at that moment, where we were standing on Canal, right on Canal, we had a perfect view of both trade centers, both towers. And so when we turned and we looked is when we saw the first tower to collapse was the second tower to get hit. So the building I was in was the first building to collapse. And that was because it got hit so low that the weight above caused that one to collapse first. Remember, the other one was hit way up top.
Right.
So that one had all the strength underneath the building to hold it up. But the second building, because it got hit in the middle, it weakened much faster. And so I remember standing there in Canal Street, and I was looking as the building disappeared right in front of your eyes, the same way everybody knows the smoke and all that stuff. And I thought to myself, that's my building. That's the building I was in an hour ago. And so what I came to find out days later was that 3 people that I know from the 55th floor who survived were on the 25th floor stairwell, because when the first building got hit, they sounded the alarms in both buildings and they told everybody to exit, but you couldn't use the elevators, you had to use the stairs, right? So when the first building got hit at 8:48, they sounded the alarm in both buildings. So people on the 55th floor, which is where I would have been had he not come back to get me,
right?
I would have left with them, and they descended 30 stories from 55 to 25 in 12 minutes, because that was the time in between the hits, right? It was 12 minutes. They descended 30 floors. So that's where I would have been, somewhere in the 25th or 26th floor when the second building got hit. And when the second building hit, again, because it got hit low, the fire and the fuel and the explosion and all that stuff started raining down inside the building. And because it pushed the building like this, people fell off the stairs and there was pandemonium suddenly in the stairwell. And then what happened is that policemen and firemen started to come up the stairs. And in those buildings, the stairs were in the center of the building. They weren't on the edges. They were in the center of the building. And so when the plane went through, it cut off. Any of the floors above got cut off. People on those floors above were never going to get down. Never going to get down. But then what happened is firemen and policemen started to come up. The stairs are only so big. And so now you have people coming up carrying hoses and equipment, and you have people trying to go down. And so it took those guys another 56 minutes to go from the 25th floor to the lobby. Gosh. Right? Now the building collapsed. It got hit at 9:01 and it collapsed at 10:01, basically. So it collapsed in an hour, right? They got outside on the lobby of the building at about 9:56.
Oh, wow.
Right? And then when they got there, they started running, right? And they ran away. They ran away. Now they were still in the neighborhood. When the building started to collapse, they were still in the neighborhood, but they had gotten farther enough away that they got caught in the smoke, but they didn't get caught in the actual building, right? So I think to myself, when I found this out, like, where would I have been if you didn't come back to get me that day and I was in the building and I was there, blah, blah, where would I have been? Would I have been on the 26th floor? Would I have been on the 25th floor? Would I have stopped to help somebody? Would I have gotten so shocked when I stepped out onto the lobby where the dead bodies were and the pieces and the people jumping? And would I have gotten so shocked that I froze? And it was just a matter of minutes, because then the building started to collapse. Once the building started to collapse, if you were anywhere in that plaza, it was all over. And so I think to myself, what would have happened, right? And so that guy that came back together, that guy who wouldn't take no for an answer that morning, saved my life. He absolutely saved my life.
Yeah, no question.
But we walked all the way up to Grand Central because I would commute out of Grand Central to go home. And when we got to Grand Central, it was closed, right? Because they had closed Penn Station, they closed Grand Central because nobody really knew what was. But there were throngs of people trying to get in, but they locked the doors and people couldn't get into Grand Central. And so I was fully prepared to continue to walk home. But one of the guys I was with, his father's a lawyer who had an office right at Grand Central. So we went to the father's office to use the phones. Now it's 12 o'clock. I didn't get to Grand Central till 12 o'clock. It took me 3 hours to walk from Wall Street to 42nd. And so it was now 12 o'clock, and we go up to the office, and I used the phone, and now I called my wife, who has not heard from me since 9 o'clock, and now she's seen all this stuff happening, and she has no idea where I am. Am I dead or am I alive? Blah, blah, blah. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, was at a private school in Tarrytown, New York. And what the school did when this event happened, the school has a record of all the parents and where the parents work and the office buildings are in and all that stuff. And so any parent that had a World Trade Center address, they went around the school, took the kids to the class. And I had a World Trade Center address.
Right.
And so they took my daughter out of class along with all these other kids, and they didn't tell them anything. They brought them to the cafeteria and they said, listen, you need to call home because there's been an accident downtown and you need to call home. So she calls home, and my wife picks up the phone, and it's that in-between time when no one had heard from me. And so my wife tries to explain to her what happened, and my daughter said, is Daddy okay? Is Daddy coming home? And so my wife didn't really know the answer to that question, yet she said, Daddy's coming home, but yet she didn't really know if I was coming home or wasn't coming home because she hadn't heard from me and she didn't know where I was. And so I remember that somebody went and picked my daughter up and brought her home because they sent all these kids home. And after we made the phone calls and after I told her I was okay and all that stuff, then I was going to come home. I said, listen, I might end up having to walk home. That's perfectly okay with me. You can't come to the city to get me. I'm not taking the train to get out of here. They've shut down Grand Central. I said, I'm fully prepared to walk home. When I get out of the city, we'll figure it out, but don't worry about it. So when we came down, they decided to open up Grand Central. They wanted people just to get out of the city, get on any train and get out. And so I did. So I got on the train that I had to get on. And if you've ever been to Grand Central, there are 2 levels. There's the ground level, and then there's the subterranean level, which is down in the belly of the city, right? And so naturally, my train's down in the belly of the city. Of course it is. And so I go down into my train, and the trains were packed just shoulder to shoulder, and nobody was talking, but you could hear people crying, you could hear people praying, but nobody was like just talking, right? And so the doors shut. And electric trains, when the train first starts to move, the sparks fly and the lights in the train go off and on and off and on. And so that's what happened. And when they went off and on, people started to gasp because right away you thought, the train was going to blow up, right? It didn't, but it was so stressful at the moment, right? And so it takes 12 minutes to leave when you leave the station to get out to 125th Street, where you come up and out, you're actually outside. And when the trains come up out of there, it comes up and it turns left and then it goes north again. And when a train turns left, you have this spectacular view of the west side of Manhattan. You can see all the way down to the tip on a clear day. You can see Lady Liberty, you can see it all, right? And so when the train came up and out and it made that left, everybody in the train kind of leaned over to look out the window. And all you saw was the smoke. The buildings were gone. It was just this smoke that was hanging over the city. And I'll never forget that, like, people just stared out the window, and then the train moves north, and so you can't see it anymore. But then people were just crying and people were just praying, but no one was really talking, right? So then the train got home, and by the time I get to my stop, it was 2:30 in the afternoon. I got in my car and I drove home. I got into my house. It was 10 minutes to 3, whatever time it was. And there were a bunch of people at my house who had come to my house, neighbors, friends, whatever. And so I walked in, and my wife was there, my kids were there, all these other people were there, and I sat down on the couch and I just stared at the television because now I hadn't really seen what everyone else had been watching, right?
Yeah.
And I sat on the couch and I just stared at the television, and I stayed on that couch for 3 days. I couldn't even move. right? I remember it was 24 hours a day. It was nothing else, right? I just stared at the TV. And, the exchange didn't open obviously on Tuesday. It didn't open on Wednesday. It didn't open on Thursday. And here's the part that nobody understood. And this is the part that nobody, no one made it public because it would have created massive, massive panic. But when we went through Y2K, and after the world went through Y2K, then it was incumbent upon the exchange. The exchange had been spending all the 90s getting ready to modernize post the turn of the century, right?
Yeah.
So now, once we went through the turn of the century and everything worked and planes didn't fall out of the sky and GPS systems worked and all that shit, computers worked, then it was the push to start to automate the New York Stock Exchange and the trading practices and all that stuff. And so we did all that. So now it's September of 2001. So it's a year after we've done all that. But what people didn't understand was all the fiber optic, well, they were T1 lines. They weren't fiber optic yet. We didn't have fiber optic, but they were T1 lines and telephone lines. Everything that was connected to the New York Stock Exchange that made all those servers and computers work, all the communication lines that allowed order flow to come in, executions to happen, reports to go out, all around the world, connected everywhere. The lines ran through the belly of the Trade Center because there was the conduit that went out through the belly of the Trade Center, under the Hudson River, and then out in Jersey. And from there, right, it was like a web. And what people didn't realize, when the Trade Centers collapsed, everything got destroyed. So
severed.
All the cables and wires get severed. So now the New York Stock Exchange was actually neutered. It did not function because now we had open outcry was gone. Right now, it was all about technology. It was all let the computers do it.
Right.
Well, guess what? Now the computers couldn't do it because even though you could turn the lights on at the New York Stock Exchange and turn the computer on, there was no communication because the lines were all severed. And so that became apparent immediately to anybody in the industry, right? The SEC, the government, the industry. It was apparent that the New York Stock Exchange was now, right? And there was no backup plan. Here's the other thing. There was no backup plan for an event like that. Who could have even considered an event like that?
Right.
Yeah, there was a trading floor a mile away in Brooklyn. Trust me, it wasn't a trading floor. Look at nursery school, right? And so there was no real backup plan. And so the exchange couldn't open. It certainly didn't open on Tuesday, but then it couldn't open on Wednesday, couldn't open on Thursday. And so we shipped guys in from around the country, fiber optic guys and cable guys and wire guys, telephone guys, because now they had to get the New York Stock Exchange reconnected to the outside world. In the middle of this tragedy, they had to get this done. And when you cannot imagine what the wiring looks like. If you go to the New York Stock Exchange, the trading floor is lifted, and you can pick up parts of the trading floor, and it goes down 8 feet, right? And underneath the trading floor are these just miles and miles of wires that connects all these servers to computers and telephones out to the outside world. It's amazing to understand how anyone even understands what's under there, right?
Right.
But
how to find anything there.
How to find, I mean, it's amazing. It's truly amazing. And so we shipped these guys in immediately because they had to wire up the New York Stock Exchange, because guess what? Open outcry was gone. And since order delivery was now electronic and all that stuff, and the open outcry, all that stuff was gone. That the only way to trade stocks again was they had to get this rewired. And the other thing they had to do was Merrill Lynch and Dean Witter and Lehman Brothers and Kenneth Fitch, all these brokers that were in the buildings that collapsed or those buildings surrounding that got damaged, they all had to find new places to trade, to set up shop. ICAP, which was the firm where I had my business under their umbrella, was one of those firms. And so they ended up most of the places went to the meatpacking district in New York. Part of the meatpacking district, remember, they were all these big old warehouses that were mostly empty.
Yeah.
And so Bloomberg sent all kinds of Bloomberg machines, and Verizon sent telephones, and they were all picnic tables, right? Picnic tables everywhere. And they set up these offices like that, picnic tables and phone systems and Bloomberg and wires everywhere. But they did it. Here's the most amazing thing. They did it in 6 days. It was really unbelievable to think of the task of rewiring and doing that, right? Because you have a problem with your internet at your house. You can't get Verizon to come there. Well, they rewired the whole place. And we had to come down over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday. Now, all they kept saying was, on Wednesday, there was like a telephone tree, right, of exchange people. And so Wednesday morning, I had a phone call, exchange is not opening, make your calls. And so then I made the calls and the calls and all that. And then Thursday, exchange not opening. Friday, exchange not opening. And so now what happens? Think about this for a minute. On Tuesday, when the event happens, okay, everyone understands the exchange early. But now Wednesday, here you are, Justin Nielsen, you've worked your whole life, you've got money in your 401k, and on Monday night it was worth $5 million. And on Tuesday, now this event happens, and now you look at your wife and you go, you know what? I want my money. I don't want to own Johnson & Johnson and Verizon, which are all fine companies, but you go, screw it, I want my money. Yep. So you call your broker, Arush, and you say, hey, Arush, I want you to sell my stocks. And he says, I can't, because the exchange isn't open. And the NASDAQ wasn't open either, because you couldn't open one exchange and not the other.
Right.
So everything was shut down. If you remember, everything in this country was shut down. Nothing traded in this country. And so then you say, okay, so then on Thursday morning, you wake up and you call Arush and you say, okay, Arush, sell my stocks today. And he says, I can't. And so now you start to think, okay, on Monday, my account was worth $5 million. And then this event happens. And now there's panic around the country and really around the world. And I can't sell my stocks. And when I do, maybe it's only going to be worth $3 million.
Right.
You don't know, right?
Yep.
And then Friday morning, you get up, you call Arusha, okay, sell my stocks. Now, think about this. We as Americans, we invest in Asia, we invest in Europe. Well, Europeans and Asians invest in America as well. Right. And so when this event happens, they call their broker over in China or Singapore or Australia, wherever they are, or Europe, France, Germany, Italy, wherever it is. They call their broker and say, sell my US stocks. Can't. So now do you see what's happening? There's this global panic starting to build. And we knew it was coming, but yet we couldn't do anything about it other than try to get the place up and running again, right? Because there was going to be this global panic. And so
now, Kenny, so after it got up, did you go back to the location? I mean,
yes. So we had to go down on Saturday and Sunday. We had to test our phones. Now, look, I had 12 individual direct dial phones that used to come into my booth to each one of my customers. They provided me one phone line, one single phone line to try to run my business when I had 12 phone lines before, right? We had 6 computers in my booth space on the floor. Two of them were working. The other 4 weren't working because there was just not enough bandwidth, right?
Right.
And so they put this place back together with spit and Band-Aids. They really did. I have to tell you, they did an amazing job.
Yeah, absolutely
so we
incredible.
tested the system on Saturday and Sunday, and then Monday we had to come back. And on Monday the 17th, it was a really emotional day. It was a really emotional day. And when we got back, the people who could come back came back, but there were people who decided, I'm not going back.
Right.
And there were 3 members who we lost because they were in the trade center up having breakfast at that event on Windows of the World. So we lost them. And then there were some people who just chose not to come back. And everyone who could come back came back on Monday. But there was also EMT, policemen, firemen. There was Hillary Clinton. There was Chuck Schumer, right? The state senators. There were congressmen representing different parts of the city. And there was this woman from the Army that they brought in. And they had her up on the podium. And at 9:15, they rang the bell once. And when they ring the bell once at the exchange, that means everyone's quiet because there's an announcement or there's something happening. Everyone's quiet. They rang the bell once. The whole place just complete silence. And suddenly this woman starts to sing God Bless America. And she just belts it out in an a cappella. She just sang God Bless America. And you're standing there on the floor of the exchange after this horrendous event happened, and there's this tragedy 3 blocks away, and here we are trying to get the country back up and running again because it was important not only for the country, it was important for finance, it was important for the global financial system because we had gotten taken out of the picture for 6 days. And America did not trade. Remember, money trades around the world. Sunday night in New York is Monday morning in Asia. And then the sun sets on Asia, it rises in Europe. And then it sets on Europe, it rises in America. Then it sets in America, goes back to Asia. And so 24 hours a day, money's moving around the world, right? Stocks are trading around the world all the time. And so, but stocks hadn't traded since Tuesday. And so everyone was very concerned on this Monday that the bell was going to ring and the market was going to come under immediate intense selling pressure because it was the first opportunity for anybody to sell. And that's exactly what happened is the market came under, they rang the bell and everybody went like this. Because I fully expected the place to implode meaning fail because they put it together with spit band-aids. Right. Volume was going to surge. The market was going to come under pressure. It was all running on technology that was put together with a shoestring. And so when it happened, when the bell rang, you could hear the hum of the computers, and then suddenly the ticker tape started to move, and you could see that stocks started to trade, and the market came under immediate sell pressure. And it closed down, I think 590 or 600 points that day, which was a huge move in 2001. 600 points on the Dow. But everyone ran around all day like on eggshells, and there was none of that usual, that usual banter that used to take place on the floor. None of that. Everyone was just focused, and it was just a somber day, but yet everyone just did what they had to do. And the market, as the day wore on, the market got weaker and weaker, and then at 4 o'clock the bell rang, and it was an ugly day financially. But I have to tell you something, it was probably one of the greatest days of my career in the sense that here we were really at what people would describe then as the heartbeat of capitalism. And you had felt like the whole country just got kicked in the gut 6 days before, and everyone got knocked down. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, even as ugly as it was, you could almost feel like the whole country locked arms with each other and stood up. It was that powerful that you could feel the whole country stand up. And it was at that moment that we said, okay, you kicked us pretty hard and we fell down, but guess what? Now we stood up and now we're coming to get you. And it was such a feeling of, it was such mixed emotions, because on the one hand, people started to cry, grown men actually crying because the stress had been up here all day. Everyone expecting failure, and it didn't fail. So they were tears of patriotism. They were tears of incredible joy that, we stood up, that this horrendous event happened, yet you could see through, right? And listen, it remained horrendous, and it is still horrendous 20 years later, but it remained horrendous for weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards, right? I mean, listen, it took months and months and months for them to even sift through what was over there, just right. And the smell, because the fire in the belly of the trade center burned for 3 months. It burned until November, and so every day there was this odor that was emanating from the trade center, and depending on which way the wind was blowing that morning, either it got blown out over the Hudson into Jersey, or it got blown out over Lower Manhattan. When you came out of the subway, you got hit with this stench that I can't describe to you other than to say that it was the smell of death, right? Because it was burning bodies and concrete and desks and rugs and just shit, right? And but it was a horrendous smell that I can smell it, like I can still smell it. I can't tell you though what it smelled like, because I can only describe it as I described it, right? It doesn't smell like the ocean. It doesn't smell like roses. It just has a stench. And but after that day, we realized, and the country realized, that this was going to be a significant event in the history of the United States for sure, but that we were strong enough to, as ugly as it was and as painful as it was, that after the bell rang at 4 o'clock on that Monday, like there was this sense that it was going to be okay. There was a sense that the country was going to recover, and it would take a while, but you could sense that we were going to recover, and in fact we did. And then the rest is history. What happened from there, right? But the market became very erratic and volatile for weeks afterwards, because there was still this underlying fear over this second shoe to drop. Remember, there was all those conversations about there was another shoe, there was another shoe. And if you remember correctly, and it was probably a month later, I think, you could look it up and see it, but I don't know if you guys remember because you're in California, but it was 10:30 or 11 o'clock on this one trading day, and a plane had taken off from Kennedy Airport on its way to, I don't know, Dominican Republic or something. And there was a failure in the plane. There was some kind of electrical failure. And as it took off from Kennedy and it was over the Rockaways in New York, the plane exploded and it rained down on the Rockaways. And it was only a month at most, I think, after 9/11 happened. And when that news hit the tape, the market started to plunge again because everybody thought, here we go again. Here we go again. That was the next event, right? And the fact is that it happened in New York, and this plane had exploded, and pieces were just raining down on the Rockaways, right? And the market started to immediately went into a sell-off mode. But then they nipped it in the butt right away. That it was a tragedy, yes, but it was a failure of the plane. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't an attack. So the market stabilized, but it remained on edge. And it remained on edge for a number of months afterwards until everyone really felt like, okay, the second event wasn't happening, and but we remained on edge. And I'll never forget it. It was a tremendous moment in my life, as it was for everybody. But it was a tremendous moment being right there on the floor of the exchange. Everything that represented everything that America is, right? It's free, it's capitalism, it's opportunity. And it was so powerful to be there at that time in history, right? Even today, I mean, it's different today, but it still represents, when people come to New York, everyone wants to go to the New York Stock Exchange.
Right.
But because of that event, you can't go anymore, right? That event, no more. They're not letting anybody through those doors anymore. And as a result of that event, and listen, it may have happened anyway, but as a result of that event, we have the market structure we have today, which is really plan B, right? We now have 11 exchanges.
Decentralized.
It's decentralized, and we have 50 alternative venues, dark pools, alternative trading systems, where you can trade any stock anywhere. So if they blow up the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow, is it a tragedy? Absolutely. Will trading halt for the day? Probably. I'd like to think that they'd stop trading for the day. But then tomorrow, the markets would open. Now, listen, it may get ugly. Prices may fall, but you'll have an opportunity to sell or buy depending on what you want to do. In 9/11, you didn't have that opportunity because the markets couldn't open. And what's interesting is that nobody really understood why the markets couldn't open. It's because we had converted to all this technology. We were this 21st century market, and then we get screwed. Right? And I don't think, listen, I'm not saying that Al Qaeda knew the wires went through the Trade Center. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, it's just, that's how it happened. Right. And so, for as sophisticated as we were,
there was a vulnerability.
There was a massive vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so then it became clear, here we were, the biggest nation in the world in terms of market, the size of our market. And we were still in the 21st century operating in a single location. I mean, X the NASDAQ, right? You're talking about listed big, right? In a single location with 5,000 people that would show up every single day. The rest of the world, meanwhile, had already automated years ago. London back in the 80s, Japan, Asia, whatever, all back in the 80s, right? They had already decentralized and automated. The America, here we were, right? We're still operating as if it was, 1950. And so that became the call to, come up with the plan. How do we fix this? Because up to this point, we were using technology to create efficiency. How do we get efficiency? How do we get more order flow to the floor and get executed? And how do we do that electronically and get rid of the human beings? It was all about efficiency. After the event, the focus became security and stability. Efficiency fell to the third spot. Now it was all about how do we use technology to create security and stability? Forget the efficiency. That's bullshit. So today, the technology allows, as fractured as it is, and I think it's very fractured, but guess what? Because we have the technology, it connects it all. So it seems to work. And look, during COVID, the New York Stock Exchange shut down for 8 weeks. You didn't know that. Trading was not affected. If you didn't know it was shut down, you wouldn't know.
Very good point. Yeah.
Right. And so people say, well, why do we need the exchange today? Okay, I hear you. The exchange is a venue just like the electronic venues, but the difference is the exchange is iconic in this country, right? It is and this is where it's part of the fabric of the nation. It would be like, it would be like, you know, saying, why do we need Plymouth Plantation? Why don't we just get rid of it and build houses there? Because it's part of the fabric of the nation. It defines part of who we are. And while it doesn't function the same way it did 30 years ago or 40 years ago when I first started there, it in fact still functions today. It's an electronic marketplace. There's not 5,000 people there anymore. There's less than 200. And all they really do is make sure the machines keep working. The same way they do at NASDAQ, the same way they do at BIDS, the same way they do at the CBOE, it's all electronic. And so the people that are there are really people that now manage the computers. They're not really trading. The trading is done algorithmically.
You know, here we are this weekend. It's going to be 20 years. You know, it's good to remember, and especially someone like you that can really paint the picture of what it was like. You know, and you know, and it was personal for you, obviously. You know, it kind of makes it personal for all of us.
And you know what? And it took a long time because remember, I knew plenty of people that didn't make it.
Right.
Guys that were my age that had young kids and young marriages and young wives who did not have the opportunity. And so you know, there is this thing called survivor's remorse. Like I think to myself, I was in that building and so was Arush.
And so close.
Right. And why did I get the phone call? Why did he come back up to get me? Why was he so insistent that I had to leave the building?
Yeah.
Well, Arusha didn't have that chance, right? No one came to get him. He's sitting at his desk. Next thing you know, he's dead. And you know, here he was, young kid, a young wife, 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, blah blah blah. But yet, I was sitting in the office next door, and I somehow got lucky.
Yeah.
But you spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time, you know, trying to understand. And, you know, people would say to you, you know, it wasn't your time. And that doesn't help in a time like this because I say, well, why was it Arush's time?
Seriously.
And I was sitting right next to him. Why was it his time and it wasn't my time? And the other thing that's really, really unsettling for a long time is the people you know who you don't know, who you don't see anymore. So what I mean by that is I had a routine, right? I would take the train at 4:50. I'd get to Grand Central at 5:30. I'd walk down into the subway. Humans are creatures of habit. I go to the same place in the subway every day. And guess what? Arusha shows up there every day, coming from somewhere else. He wasn't on the same train. He came from Brooklyn, so he takes another train to get to Grand Central. And Justin, you come in, and then Chris comes in, and we all happen to be like animals, we're creatures of habit, where we go to the same spot every day. And I don't know you, and I don't know you, and I don't know Chris, but yet we see each other every single day. And I would say to you, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? I didn't know your name, but I'd say, how was your weekend? And then I'd get to Wall Street and I'd come up out of the subway and I'd go to the coffee cart. And there I'd see 3 more people who I didn't know, but I knew every day I would see them.
Right.
And when life returned to normal and the coffee cart guy came back and I came up out of the subway at my usual time, suddenly those 3 people never showed up again. Now, that doesn't mean that they're dead necessarily, but you don't know, right? I know my buddies who got killed, I know because I went to their funerals. I know that. But these 3 people that I would see at the coffee cart every single day, in and day out, who never showed up again, you're left to wonder what happened. And that was one of the most difficult things to kind of wrap your head around and reconcile and find a place in my head to put that, because you always wonder, did they live? Did they die? What's their family like? Do they have kids? Do they have wife? Do they, you know, like the questions don't stop. And that was also one of the most difficult things to kind of deal with, right?
How long did it take you to finally feel like you're getting back to somewhat of a normal routine where you're not thinking about it every day?
It took a while.
Yeah.
I'd say if I try to remember back, I'd say it was a good 6 or 7 months before you. I mean, listen, you thought about it every day because you couldn't help it.
Right.
Especially in those
constant reminders,
and then you hear the smells and all this.
Constant reminder, and the smell, and the you know, it was a constant reminder. But you know, I think it was probably 6 or 7 months where you didn't. It was for a while. It was overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah. Right, because I'd get out of the subway and you couldn't help but think, am I going to see them today? Am I going to see them today? Like, it was almost like I couldn't wait to see them. I wanted to hug them.
Mm-hmm.
But every day went by and they never showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the people that you're left to wonder about.
Right.
And what happened to their lives, what happened to their families, what happened to their wife and kids. And, you know, that was one of the hardest things, because the people who died, I went to their wake and I know they died. There was closure. It was just really hard. It was just really hard.
Well, and there were so many stories of that, you know, again, people that you knew, people that you didn't know. I mean, that's the thing that, I mean, I didn't have to live through it in such a personal way, but man, just hearing the stories, and, you know, you see it on TV sometimes during these anniversaries. I've been in New York a number of times. I was there at the 10th anniversary, you know, just for work. And
I'm a little bit
hear the
nervous
stories.
about this one. For some reason, I'm a little bit worked up about this weekend because of what's going on in Afghanistan. And I'm just, there's crazies out there. And my daughter lives in Manhattan. I said to her, I don't want you in the city this weekend. I just want to get out of this.
Well, again, thanks so much, Kenny.
You're very welcome.
Okay, folks, that's it for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. On next week's podcast, we're going to have Mary Ellen McGonigal. She actually is a former employee of William O'Neill & Company, and she's now currently the director of stocks at Simpler Trading. So it'll be a joy to talk to her again. Hope you join us for that. Thanks for watching and listening.
And for this week's notes and charts, make sure to go to investors.com/podcast, where you'll find details for each episode in the podcast episode section. And make sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast if you haven't already. We'd really appreciate it. You can also send us your questions and comments to investingpodcast@investors.com. We would love to hear from you and may use your comments on an upcoming episode.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching Investors Business Daily on YouTube. If you want to watch more videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing.